All right.
Introduce yourself.
Okay, so my name is Sharad Singhal. I work at HP Labs. And what I'm going to talk about today represents a work of a lot of individuals, and I hope I haven't missed any names because as I was sitting there, I was writing out the names. The presentation was actually supposed to be given by Bhasavraj. Unfortunately, he had some health issues and he may not actually be able to make it to the conference, so I'm stepping in at the last minute. Our mission in the cloud services SIG, and I'll get to the mobile SIG in a little bit, is to enable services-oriented businesses that essentially leverage cloud models. So this SIG is not about how do we create yet another Amazon. This SIG is about how do we actually develop services and what are the changes that happen in services if we use cloud as now an available infrastructure for us. Over the last year, we have scoped a number of different things to do. Starting first of all with, well, when we talk about businesses, we talk about services. Fundamentally, how does the cloud change the way we do work? We also started looking at, if we are thinking in terms of services, we are thinking in terms of large-scale deployment of services. We want to understand what kinds of standards exist, how do we use these standards so that things can be interoperate, and we have portability of services across these standards. Finally, we started looking at issues around cloud architectures. And today, I don't have enough time to go through all of the work we have done. I'll just touch a little bit on the first part, which is where I think the most interesting questions reside, which is if we start thinking about business models and we start thinking about cloud, what does that imply for us? Here is a simple taxonomy. This is a dated slide, but when you start looking at this list of things, and I don't think people in the rear can read the slide because it's from somebody else, it goes everything you can think about. Everything I use in my IT environment, everything I use in my business environment gets listed somewhere in here as one of the components that can be delivered over the cloud. And this has profound implications both on enterprises and on people who deliver services. When we think about businesses, this is what typically you see. My IT friends sit at the bottom of this stack, and the people who deal with businesses sit at the top of this stack. When I talk to my business friends, their concerns are, what's my return on investment? What is the business impact that I'm seeing? How do I manage risk inside my business? How do I deal with my portfolios? IT doesn't appear here. When they start thinking about what do I need to look at, what kinds of things I actually touch and feel, they touch and feel their financial instruments, they worry about product portfolios, they worry about the business models, they worry about the stock price, they worry about CapEx and OpEx. Again, notice IT doesn't appear here. This is what the cloud business models are about. As you go further and further down, you start seeing IT concerns come into this picture. What's happening with the cloud is that the stuff at the bottom half of this layer is essentially getting disaggregated and outsourced to some very, very large providers who provide IT as a business. And once that happens, the role of the CIO certainly shifts. And you have heard a lot of things about why cloud is going where it is going, why it is such an important thing. Of all of the things, this is one thing that I would like to share with you about what's happening. When you think about the incurred cost of a large project versus the committed cost of a large project, the amount of money I have said I will actually spend versus the amount of money I have actually spent. Over the life cycle of a project, these two things look very different. Traditionally, when we think about it, the amount of money upfront I spend is relatively small. But the choices I make early on affect a lot of the money I have committed to spend later in the project life cycle. The cloud shifts this ratio upside down. When I'm starting to look at cloud-based models, until the service provider actually delivers real value to me, I don't spend a dime. Now, that doesn't mean it's easy. But that is the reason why you're seeing a lot of the things we are looking at in the cloud. As we started looking at what this implies and started moving forward with this, we realized that cloud is simply an enabler. In the earlier talks, the two talks that preceded me, you're already beginning to hear about how these things have to come together. And what we are now doing, looking at this moving forward, is to start bringing some of these things together to understand how these things will work together. And inside this, we had discussions within the context of SRII. We talked about mobility. The first piece we are beginning to look at is how does mobility and cloud play together? Subbu's slide earlier showed 4 quadrants: analytics, cloud, mobility, and then the consumer space where I'm actually social issues, right? So we are beginning to think about the first 2 of those 4 things and starting to ask the question, if I bring cloud and mobile services together and start deploying mobile services on cloud, how will that work together? Let's see what that implies. So as we move forward, we are going to shift the cloud services SIG into something which is now the cloud and mobile services SIG. And our SRII's India chapter friends have very graciously offered to work with us in actually looking at use cases. And I will let Simon talk about some of that work as he talks about the SRII India work in a later part of the group. But basically what we are looking at now is take the 2 pieces together and ask some questions around by taking some specific use cases about all across enterprises, especially in developing countries, people are beginning to use mobile phones, people are beginning to use mobile devices. How does this kind of environment, how does this kind of end device affect how we deal with services? What does this imply in terms of the security issues? What does it imply when my personal device is also my work device? Traditionally, that has not been thought about by the CIOs. If I'm looking to think about IT budgets are shrinking more and more, I mean, pretty soon we are beginning to already see in this country enterprises who are now saying, buy your own computer. Use your own iPhone or whatever you are to do all your business things. Why are we spending money on it? My IT budget can do without it. You have that device anyway, right? So that suddenly shifts the actual equation in how we interact with our IT friends inside my corporation, shifts how we use these devices, shifts the degree of control that the end user has versus the IT manager has. And those issues become important here. Mobile services are just growing like crazy, again, especially in places like India. And that's part of the reason for moving forward like this. And then as we go forward, we are finding that people want everything done on mobile devices. And this is where some of the data analytics kinds of questions come in, because the devices, although they are growing in leaps and bounds, my mobile device probably has the same computing power that I remember in a mainframe about 30 years ago. There's still a lot more data, there is still a lot more computation that can be done. And I think there are some very interesting questions around how can cloud computing, big data analytics, and mobility be brought together to actually solve real problems. So I will stop here, take questions if you have any, and then I expect Simon, when he talks about SRII India work, will talk further about some of these things, and we'll talk about some experiments that we are thinking about. So I will stop here and take questions if you have any, otherwise we can move on to the next presentation.
Everything is clear.
Everything is clear. I'd like to ask you a question. My name is George Miller. I work with BT. We're a telecommunications company, and one aspect that I think is very important for our clients ask a lot about is end-to-end service assurance. And as you get people consuming services through these mobile devices, that's a growing issue. I wonder if you're looking at this thing.
So the question was, what about end-to-end service quality issues? If I have multiple people, multiple devices, many different providers and people involved, how do we start thinking about end-to-end service quality, and what can we do to ensure that? That's something that, yes, that's something that's important. As we move forward, that's something we would like to think about. At the moment in the group, there aren't that many people who are experts in that domain, so I welcome you to join us and provide us your... Yeah. Yes.
Policy management around what kind of data can you access depending upon the device you're using, also where you are.
So I mean, it's a like most other things. You don't get a free lunch, so it solves a lot of problems, but it shifts a lot of problems into a different space. When I start thinking about cloud models, a lot of the things my IT staff is concerned about, worries about in my own corporation, I'm certainly I'm paying somebody else to essentially worry about. That is the cloud provider and the network providers. And from a network and a cloud network provider especially, we have been used to thinking about ourselves as transport providers. And all of a sudden, when we start thinking about services which have our brand on it, quote unquote, even if they are provided by our partners, the whole security, how do I think in terms of service reliability? Because at the end of the day, the brand becomes the carrier's brand. And I think those are all important issues to think about here.
Thank you. Thank you.